This video is not one for which I prepared the video material myself. It's the result of a phone conversation I had a week or two ago with an American student who wanted to do an interview with me. I didn't know what the interview was going to be about initially, but it turned out to be largely about automation. So what follows is the interview. There are two reasons for that. One of them is that although the actual replacement of human physical effort by power sources has taken place, and in consequence a lot more can be used with less effort, it's not the case that that ever drops to zero. Work is always going to be required. Work can become easier, but it doesn't disappear. The second thing is that with the development of technology, human wants and tastes become more sophisticated. It would be possible on relatively short working hours to provide the standard of living that existed in Britain in, let's say, 1800. You could substantially reduce the working hours to do that. On the other hand, the labor that people would have to employ in the home would be much greater, because people depended on coal fires for cooking. They didn't have hot water supplies. They had to heat it up on stoves, etc. So although if one set your target to be the real incomes which existed at the time of the Industrial Revolution, and you could achieve those real incomes with very short working hours, that would be unacceptable now, because the non-capitalist part of the labor time, the labor time that's spent in day-to-day activities in the home, would not be reduced. So that to some extent you can get a reduction in working time, but the reduction in working time is not necessarily going to be proportional to the advance in productivity, because people are going to take some of that in more sophisticated tastes. But there has been a reduction in the working week. The working week is, let's see, it's probably dropped by 40% or so since the Industrial Revolution. The working hours would commonly be above 70 hours a week, and now they're well under that. So there has been some reduction, but the reduction is not as great as the increase in productivity. But I don't think you would expect that necessarily to be the case. On the other hand, when you start to factor in things which are going to happen in the future, if you factor in the fact that we're not going to have the cheap energy sources from fossil fuels, and you factor in the things which we currently rely on, which are highly carbon dioxide producing, it's not realistic to expect a very big improvement in labor productivity over the next period. A lot of the extra effort in technological development is going to have to be used in fighting what would otherwise be a losing battle against the effects of environmental degradation and the effects of resource depletion. Consider, for example, the two great prime movers of globalization, which are the marine diesel and the high bandpass gas turbine. That's what the global economy rests on. Both of those are prolific sources of carbon dioxide. So if we're going to shift to a non-carbon dioxide producing economy, we're no longer going to be able to send 80,000 ton bulk carriers across the oceans using large marine diesels. You're going to have to shift stuff probably either people are going to invent small fusion reactors, which looks a long way off, or you're going to have to use some form of a sailing ship again, which is a reversion to a more labor-intensive form of transport, for example. If you think of what brought about cheap air travel for millions of people, it was the development of the jumbo jet with the high bandpass turbines. If you no longer allow the use of kerosene as a aviation fuel and ship to the use of liquid hydrogen, you can still fly planes on liquid hydrogen. The Soviets built a Tupolev airliner, which was fueled with liquid hydrogen. But that required them to give over the greater part of what would normally be the passenger cabin to a large tank of liquid hydrogen, because it's such low density as a fuel compared to kerosene. So that you end up with air travel that's going to be a lot more expensive in terms of the real labor that has to be put into transporting people. The plane will carry maybe a half to a third of the number of people the current plane carries. The fuel itself will cost several times what the current fuel costs. So if you identify certain key technologies like that, which are going to change in the future, because the capitalist mode of production is outrunning the resource base on which it originally existed, then these are big setbacks to overall labor productivity. And it will take maximum ingenuity to maintain living standards in the face of these, what would otherwise be very big setbacks. It depends on the senses in which the cooperative is set up on the basis of failing existing companies. So they start off in an unfavorable situation, which was the case of a number of cooperatives which were set up in Britain in the 70s. We do know that the Yugoslav economy, which was to some extent can be viewed as an economy of co-ops, had a good record in the development of labor productivity through use of machinery, because it was in the interests of the workers in a Yugoslav co-op to reduce their burden of work by employing machinery that would make their work easier. So they were good at doing that. On the other hand, you have to be aware that cooperatives set up a unit of self-interest, which is the members of the cooperative. And the members of the cooperative, therefore, are going to carry out policies which will tend to maximize their revenue and their income. So although the Yugoslav system was quite good at developing labor productivity by European standards, it was not good at providing full employment, because it was against the interest, in many cases, of the cooperative to take on additional workers, because that meant the revenue of the cooperative is shared among a larger pool. So that the problem that the cooperative economy in Yugoslavia had was chronic unemployment, which was in part resolved by emigration to work in other countries. But that shouldn't be happening in a socialist economy. You shouldn't need to emigrate. So that we know that cooperatives are pretty good for developing automation, and they develop it in ways that is in the interest of those working there. But whether just one individual firm will do well depends a lot on the circumstances in which it is set up, whether it is in a strong market. Well, we know that in the past, workers' movements have succeeded with this. The French socialist movement was able to introduce a 30-hour week, which essentially meant a 3-day week or 3 or 4 day week. They were able to do that from the 1980s. And Macron is gradually trying to roll that back. But yes, I mean, that can be done. It's likely to be done only where you've got a strong trade union movement, a well-organized trade union movement that can push that and has political. No, that's a byproduct of the existence of private firms engaging in it. In a socialist system, there's no reason why you couldn't stipulate all these things were going to be